G'day and welcome to Beyond the Boundary. My name is Tom and joining me today is Nicole. G'day Nicole.
Hello Tom.
In this show we're going to be going into the deeper part of sport, going beyond just the game and investigating what actually goes into it and what happens afterwards. What do you think of that?
I'm very excited about it, Tom. I think it's really good to see what is behind. This was actually put together by students.
Yeah. Melbourne Polytechnic students.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We've got a story later on about sledging that I think is going to be really great to kind of investigate that beyond just the game and see how that affects players and younger players as well in the junior leagues of football, and see about that. We've actually got a story on the history of the MCG right now that we'd like to give you a look at. Let's have a look.
The Melbourne Cricket Ground opened in 1853, with the first public grandstand coming later on in 1861, 7 years after the members' stand was erected. During the Second World War, from 1942 to 1945, the MCG served as a home to more than 200,000 members of the US Army Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force, and the US Marine Corps. But the MCG didn't make an impression on the world stage until the Melbourne Olympics, where it gained international acclaim, playing the centrepiece for the Games. Olympic fever began to take a hold of Melbourne in the lead up to Games, with a massive 103,000 people filling the stadium for the opening ceremony. As well as hosting the normal events such as athletics and soccer, the MCG also hosted an AFL exhibition game during the Olympics, which introduced the sport quite possibly for the first time, and certainly the first time on this scale, to an international audience. In the modern era, the G, as it's known by most Melburnians, is loved for its use hosting cricket and AFL. The MCG is accepted as one of the best and most famous cricket grounds in the world, with it playing home to the classic Boxing Day Test this year being part of the Ashes. Its iconic statues that surround the ground included cricketing greats and Cricket Hall of Fame inductees such as Shane Warne, Neil Harvey, Bill Ponsford, Sir Donald Bradman, Dennis Lillee and Keith Miller. Probably the most looked forward to event on the Australian sporting calendar is the AFL Grand Final. The MCG has played host to the Grand Final every year since its first time hosting in 1902, aside from when the MCG was used for military purposes, and in 1991 when it was being upgraded, during which the Grand Final was held at VFL Park, now known as Waverley Park. The MCG is and will continue to be the heart and soul of Australian sport, with its rich history and eclectic atmosphere.
Wow, what a wonderful story that was, Tom.
Yeah, it was so incredible to see the history of the MCG like that.
Such a rich history that was.
I didn't even know it was the home for so many military soldiers during World War II.
No idea.
That was great. There's an interesting clip in there of the guy lighting the flame above the MCG. I think someone told me that they'd had the gas on for so long because they didn't know how else to. They were so worried it wouldn't light.
Burn out.
Yeah. So when he lit it, it just exploded and burnt his arm off because there was no health and safety back then. But yeah, incredible story.
The Olympics definitely did put it on the map.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we hold so many sporting events there all the time. It's incredible. Yeah.
We're going to take a look now at our next segment, which is people and their take on sledging.
When you're abusing an player or something like that, racially, or just if you know something about their personal life, that sort of thing, I suppose. That's what sledging's all about.
Distract the person and make them stuff up by saying stuff.
Nasty way trying to influence players or sort of to affect their performance?
Probably is part of the culture in sport, yeah.
No, definitely not.
When you start to get personal, religious type stuff, racial type of thing, that more or less crosses the line, or anything about you, they know about your missus or anything like that sort of thing, I suppose. That's where the line should be drawn, more or less.
When it gets personal and makes someone retaliate pretty badly.
Oh, some of the comments they said the Goodgie weren't real good.
Booing's a bad, I don't know. I don't really like booing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
I don't think you should get involved personally. Just be above that and that criticism, and just report it to the relative authorities and let them deal with it.
The times changed now. Like back in the day, you get away with that sort of stuff, but now you can't really be saying that sort of stuff. Like it's not a good look for the game as well.
Yeah, in fun, it's always an Australian to take the mickey out of your opponent and that. It's only when it gets nasty and personal.
Wow, there were some characters in there, weren't there?
There was a few.
Really interesting to hear about what people have to say. Quite a variety of opinions still, even though it's to many seen as something that is essentially bullying.
But you could see even some of them I won't name didn't really take it on a serious note, which
No.
I think it is.
Like that guy is a bit, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of a bit, off in the clouds. But
I did like what that lady said though, to rise above it. I
Yeah.
think that at the end of the day, people need to know that it's just a game, and
yeah,
it really is just about the sport, and
yeah.
really don't need to involve all the other
And
nasties in it.
You've got to be so careful what you say to certain people on the ground, because you don't know what kind of day people have had. Even
That too.
on a small level like that, people can be really on edge that day and just feel like lashing out a little bit, and
can
that's
trigger
where that
people.
retaliation will come into play really badly there. So we have a story next on sledging and what it's about and the effects of it. So we'll have a look at that now.
Hey, come on. Start doing some long pass.
So I'm the president of the Fitzroy Junior Football Club. We've got 28 teams this year, 9 girls teams, 650 kids. Sledging, I think sledging is you're trying to put someone off their game, so you use whatever means you can to be rude, disrespectful, to try and get into their mind. I think good sportsmanship is extremely important in all sports, not just Fitzroy, but from our point of view, it's a cultural thing. Being good sports is about respecting people, respecting your umpires, respecting your opponents, respecting your own teammates. So it's very important.
I'm a senior lecturer in sport ethics in the College of Sport and Exercise Science and a researcher with the Institute of Sport, Exercise and Active Living. No, I don't think there's any place for sledging in the modern world of sport. It treats your opponents as an object to be overcome rather than, playing the game in the spirit it's meant to be played. Oh, look, I think there's a space for humour in sport. I mean, sports, even at the professional level, sport is still a kind of leisure activity. Whoever wins the game isn't going to affect sort of the gross domestic product of the nation. So it's still a leisure activity. On the weekend, it was reported in the Herald Sun that Jake Kelly, an Adelaide footballer who's the son of Craig Kelly, the player manager, said to Stevie Johnson, you've been paying for my trip over to Europe for the last 6 years. Now that's humorous. That's great. That fits in with the play, but it's also not particularly personal. It's not particularly insulting. So there is certainly a place for humour in sport. If it's personal, then it goes too far. So, you know, there's a category of personal insult around racial vilification. Now, that's an obvious stepping over the line. But the same applies with any personal insult. Anything that causes pain to another should be, you know, sort of prevented in sport.
I think it should not be in any sport or any school or area where sledging it should always be what you say and always be aware of who you say it to. Oh, I reckon it is the same as bullying. Bullying is the biggest one, an issue in kids growing up in schooling life and also in the sporting world. Bullying is it's a thing that you got to not use it in so much in that area. So I reckon it's the same as sledging as well.
We had an incident with a girl who was being sledged and called all sorts of names, and her parents said, look, if they'd got into a physical altercation, it would have been better than the fact that they had a verbal altercation because she took it so personally.
We certainly wouldn't accept it in kids' sport. There's a number of sports that don't accept it, like golf. There's whole cultures that don't accept it. I was just speaking to a colleague who's an expert in Japanese sport, and he says there's no sledging in Japanese sport. It just wouldn't be accepted.
Sledging is old school days. Sledging gets called out now. If we have a game, within our juniors and that, we'll be the first where people or parents will call us up and talk about the fact that someone was either sledging and how they just won't accept it. It's old school bullying, really. Our motto, and our coaches wear badges, we wear badges, and one of the mottos is respect. And clearly, if you're sledging someone, you're not respecting your opponents. And I think play the game tough, play the game, with energy, but respect your opponents. I think any sledging is trying to have a cause and effect on the person that's being sledged, and then that sledging can then lead, is a fine line between sledging and bullying, and people will take that differently, and someone that's vulnerable, we know what happens with bullying, and so, that's the extreme side of why sledging, it's bullying.
As an Indigenous kid growing up and as a young boy in my own community, we were bullied a lot and sledged a lot for our colour and our culture, and it's just got to be aware what you say to people like that. It can affect a footy player's life as well, in the sport, and other people in sport as well. You got girls who are playing footy these days as well, and you can't go out there and abuse them for what they want to do and enjoy. It's everybody's game. You guys at school. It's everybody. It's your future. And try and get on as best we can.
As is with girls' footy, women's footy, as is, society's changing, it's growing, it's evolving, it's accepting. If we go back, the climate 10 years ago, 20 years ago is vastly different from what it is now.
During the 90s, we sort of developed this idea of, the Magpie Army and various things like that, as if the crowd had some influence on the game, or the crowd could affect the game by the comments they called out. Now, what do I think about crowd members who are adults who call out insulting things across the fence? I think it's unfortunate, but it probably is something that's been produced over decades rather than just in the last few years. I guess it's the difference between loving a sport and loving a team. Some people love a team and don't really love the sport. They just want their team to win. For me, if you love a sport, you can celebrate good play by whoever's on the ground. And, that's something I believe in. I don't think people understand, despite the high wages paid, I don't think people understand that this is a workplace for footballers, and there's a necessity that there are two teams on the ground, otherwise sport kind of doesn't work too well. And they are co-workers.
You know, we do have feelings ourselves, even though we did play in a high-profile sporting life ourselves. But you know, we do, do have feelings as well, like everybody else. And it's just not nice to bully or sledge or to abuse somebody for what they are.
Generally, at least now, if athletes cross the line and insult one of their opponents, generally there is some sense of communal outrage. So, you know, when Adam Goodes got insulted by a spectator, there were players from all sorts of teams who would stand up for him. The same occurs in all the American professional sports. You know, there's sort of limits. What I'm suggesting is maybe the limits aren't drawn wide enough. Oh, obviously racial vilification, you know, since the kind of Winmar incident. And you know, thank God for that, because I think that is definitely untouchable. You know, sexuality should be untouchable. But I guess, Jesse, what I'm saying is that anything that has the potential to hurt another person should be untouchable. And if that's how they look, if that's their hairstyle, then I'm suggesting that should be untouchable.
Like you're saying, it's not nice to sledge anybody, and no matter what team you play for. You know, I barracked with St Kilda still, and I found it a bit, you know, they dealt with it the best way they could. Got in on top of it as quick as it could, but you know, you shouldn't have to do that to get results. And also Adam Goodes, he's a great man, great footballer, on and off the field. He's a role model, a mentor to everybody. What happened that night has been dealt with, and I mean, like, just be aware and what you say and do. I mean, if you do go to sporting venues and games, go there and to enjoy it. Just no matter what team you barrack for, just go there and really enjoy the atmosphere.
I think it was, you know, a very courageous position taken by Adam Goodes, because he knew he was going to cop a backlash, but still stood up for his principles. There's a historical context to calling black people and black athletes apes that has to be taken into account. Should he just put up with it? No. If it's insulted him, if it's hurt him, if it struck him deeply, then he should be very vocal in what he says about the insult. And I think it was, you know, a very courageous position taken by Adam Goodes, because he knew he was going to cop a backlash, but still stood up for his principles. I don't quite know another way he could have made his point without there being some damage to the young girl, which is unfortunate, but which apparently was resolved between the two of them shortly thereafter. The problem of others continuing the backlash, you know, I don't know how Goodes can deal with that. I thought him and his football team took a very courageous stand in sitting out of the game for a couple of weeks.
The way AFL players and that handled themselves today is once again much different than the way they used to. It's a much more professional organisation. You know, just as I try to teach my kids not to kick around the corner and dribble goal kicks like the AFL do because they want to copy them, they'll copy whatever they do. And if they're not leading by example, or if they're setting the wrong example, it filters down.
Oh, you got Eddie Betts is doing well. You got Lindsay Thomas. You got, I mean, there's a lot of other players who are playing well. Paddy Ryder and all them. Yeah, no, there's a lot of Indigenous guys out there, but you know, they're there as well, like we were, and they're there to support the next generation that's coming through. So you know, just sit back and enjoy what they do.
Hey, you want to start doing some
Wow, what an interview. And Nicky Winmar, how lucky were we to get him in that story? How relevant and fitting was that?
Very good. He is a very big person for a lot of people, in the sense that in the Aboriginal community and with a lot of other people, with how he took a stand against the racism towards him at that time, and how important it is still to this day, and what a role model he is.
So fitting. Yeah, it was incredible. I thought all of those interviews were so great to see. I found the interview with Phil the president of the Fitzroy Football Club, quite interesting as well. The things that he was saying about junior girls footy and how he was saying he'd rather that it was a physical altercation than a verbal one, because the verbal one was taken so personally and had such a deep effect. Such a good way to demonstrate the dangers of sledging.
The mental wounds.
Yeah, the mental wounds.
It doesn't have to be physical, definitely right.
Absolutely. Yeah, and also how that guy was talking about, different cultures having different kind of rules and respects around sledging, and how, like, he said Japanese sports doesn't have sledging, which is interesting. That it's perhaps a cultural thing to a certain extent.
Australia is so multicultural, we're very lucky in that respect that we have so many people, but I think that, sport is supposed to bring people together, just like Australia has brought different people together, and I think that's really beautiful. But, everyone keeps, when we look at that, it's not really, we take away from the sport, and all the focus is on the negative when people address other people based on their sexuality or their race. And I think that, like that other lady said, to rise above and be a bigger person and overlook all that and look at the sport for what it is and just enjoy it. And we're sending an example and a message to our kids if we accept that kind of,
absolutely.
Like that young girl that got all
model.
that backlash from that incident, she, it's probably seen from home and how she sees people on the fields and probably her parents, and for her to be put in a place like that sent a big message to a lot of people and to a lot of young people too, that they have to be accountable for their actions, and what they say does matter and it does hurt other people.
Yeah, absolutely. On a different note, we have a story now, just some highlights from a netball game filmed on the weekend that we'd like to have a look at.
Great action scene by the State Netball Centre. That's it for today, Tom. That wraps up our show. So much things touched on.
Absolutely.
So much more exciting things more
to
see.
We'll be back next week with more behind the scenes and beyond the boundary. But until then, we'll see you next week. I've been Tom.
Nicole.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching.